The opinions expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
So for the entire run, we've done this show from 2006 to now. I've always made jokes about not having a real guest to do this. Norm's great whenever he comes on when we do the Anime North episodes, but you know we can always count on hearing from him. But I'm so honored that today that streak ends. First, when a little later, when Jesse Betteridge talks with us during our regular episode later this evening. But I am so honored to welcome, to talk with us for a little bit. We'll see for how long, because you know how we are, James. I'm so honored to welcome Fred Schodt. To me, doesn't need much of an introduction. To anybody, to longtime fans, probably won't need too much of an introduction. Translator extraordinaire, has worked on a lot of keystone projects. Worked with Osamu Tezuka as a translator. That's probably the key one. And also, this is his first visit to Toronto and Anime North in 21 years, since the second Anime North back in 1998. I was almost at 2000. Back in 1998. So, well, first of all, it is good to see you again, Fred, after all these years.
It's great to be back. It's great to be alive, to be able to be back.
No, well... Okay, and he admitted, Fred admitted that maybe we have to jog his memory a little bit from 21 years ago.
Yeah, I couldn't remember whether was 98 the second or the first anime. So there was 1 year before.
1998 was the second Anime North,
okay.
Which took place at the Michener Institute in downtown Toronto, which was just near Chinatown in the downtown course. So it was it's a medical. I think the Michener Institute is still a medical studies building for the U of T.
And that makes a lot of sense because there are certain things I remember, certain things I don't. And one thing I do remember is that afterwards, several of us went out to dinner in Chinatown and we ate Chinese food. And I remember there was somebody at the table who was involved in networking, computer networking.
Okay.
And I thought, and I think Jack Kim. I remember the name Jack Kim.
He was one of the early. He was one of the organizers.
Yeah, he was one of the early guys, right? The pioneers. Mm-hmm. So I remember that. I remember that very clearly. I remember being at this table.
I think, it was funny because Eileen McAvoy, the program director here at Anime North, just before as we came into the room, presented us with an old picture of your appearance here back in '98 when you were doing a couple panels with Norm.
Yeah, there I am with my ponytail, my blue shirt.
I remember that. As I said, the ponytail, it took me a minute. When I saw you yesterday, it took me a minute to ultimately recognize you. So.
Well, what's amazing is that Norm looks almost exactly the same as he does today. I'd recognize
him. The Captain Caveman look, just a little bit more gray hair, I think.
Yeah, a little more gray hair, but he looks pretty much the same.
He hasn't changed. Yeah. So, when we first met, I was asked at the time in '98 to do a panel about history depicted in anime and manga, and a lot of that discussion, as I remember it, and and you admit my memory of it may be a little better than yours, centered on stuff that told stories from the war, from World War II, and then I brought up Rurouni Kenshin with you. Yeah. And I tried certain ties with it, because I knew you knew, since I knew from your Tezuka work that, and I knew that that Tezuka was a fan of Takarazuka. When I regularly saw their plays, I noted to you that the woman who played Kenshin was played by a woman, was Meiyo Sukaze, who was who had her start as a big star with Takarazuka. Actually played Oscar in The Rose of Versailles in one of the plays. Oh, wow. So that was the tie I used with you, and I know I caught your attention with that.
I remember because you were one of the first, most informed fans of Rurouni Kenshin that I had met. So. And I didn't know a lot about the series, so it was interesting. I like history as well. So.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me because over the years since, we started to coin the phrase historical fiction. And that was when I think back, looking back on it all, I look at Kenshin as one of those one of the things that kind of where I start to really solidify the term in my mind. And then obviously the term has been, used en masse in more mainstream stories since. Titanic probably being the most famous.
Well, I mean, it's amazing to see in a convention like this too how so many people get interested in history and learn about history through anime or manga, and they say that anime and manga are the gateway to the drug gateway to Japanese culture, but actually they're also a wonderful entry point into history. And I meet more and more people now who have gotten into studying history because they were fans of some particular series set in a particular era in Japan, and they just got hooked.
Yes, that's sort of what it was.
And I feel that helps. Like, when you go to visit a place, it's more than just Akihabara
Oh,
or
yeah.
Denden Town.
Yeah.
I go to a place and I want to see, what are these people, what are their stories?
Yeah.
And there are so many stories in Japan, from the many different temples to the many different cities and stuff like that. And even some of their saddest histories have different stories.
Yeah.
Between Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I had people that went there and had very different experiences.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
So,
And I've always been a fan of history. I love history. I think there's so much to learn from it.
yeah, I mean, for me, watching anime, manga, I just got more interested in Japanese history and in culture at large. And then we started to learn a little bit more about maybe some of the political stuff, and maybe some of the cities actually depicted. Like, we often see little towns that we may have never heard of depicted in a movie or a feature. And that's what so Miyazaki is famous for that. Studio Ghibli is famous for that. And in more recent times, Shinkai has kind of done it himself as well. So the gateway is there. And I think for fandom these days, from my standpoint, it helps, like, you can't help but maybe at least gain some sort of curiosity about how this is, what it may actually be like in real life. Yeah. So
even if it's fiction.
Even if it is fiction, yes. I mean, Kenshin was fiction, but it certainly pulled from a lot of real events and characters,
From the Meiji era and stuff
especially
like that.
from that era.
And I think usually the creators, even manga and anime, and well, not just manga and anime, but all good creators of fiction, they usually try and do a huge amount of research to set their stories in believable environments and believable time frames. And I meet people like that, not just manga and anime artists, but even writers. I'm always impressed with the amount of work that some people do before they start writing fiction, because you would think you could just create everything, but actually it's like computer graphics are so difficult to create, like a feature film, because you have to create everything. But if you're creating something about history, at least you have a frame of reference. You have elements to model after.
But sometimes it does also involve its own set of research. Yeah, without a doubt, right? Yeah. I mean, on the topic of historical fiction, I met a Canadian Japanese author who wrote a story about Japanese Canadians who got deported back to Japan, even though they were born in Canada in the aftermath of the war. This is how our internment, how Canadian internment went here. There were a lot of those incidences. So she wrote a story about somebody who was, and it was fictional, but it was made in that context, knowing that type of stuff happened. Well, where do we continue? Where do we really start our little conversation? Because when I mentioned I want to talk about like 4 specific things, your 3 panels, which we'll get to in a minute, and then I looked across your and I'm having trouble. I have to call it up. Me and being prepared. Look up some of your accolades and stuff and past works, and it mentioned to me, or it was brought out, that you received an award from the Emperor, the Order of the Rising Sun, back in 2009.
Right, and I have to qualify it because it's gold Rays with Rosette. There are many different levels of the same award, and so
kind of like the Order of Canada.
Kind of like Order of Canada.
It's not the top level, but it was a huge honor.
It's still there.
A very
it was
big
a huge
honor.
honor. Yeah.
So
for what I do, it was just totally unexpected.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we I mean, when you told us your story, when we'll get to Four Immigrants a bit later. Like what you did, and telling that story, I think, and then promoting Tezuka and his legacy over the years. It was
still quite a surprise, and it remains a huge honor. Yeah.
Well, on that note, the word emperor came out, and obviously we are now, I think, near the end of the first month of the Reiwa era with the change. In a recent episode, we talked about the change of the emperor, the change from Akihito to Naruhito, and you mentioned during one of your panel yesterday on Four Immigrants that towards the end that you mentioned that you did meet the new emperor.
Yeah,
Naruhito.
I did. I met him. I won the Japan Foundation Award, and one of the results of that was that I didn't meet the reigning emperor. I met the crown prince before he became the new emperor. So I met him just a little over, I guess, a year and a half ago, and I met both him and Masako.
The Empress.
Yeah, who is now the Empress, and she was the crown princess at that point, I guess, if that's the right word. And so it wasn't in conjunction with the big award that you mentioned, the award of the Rising Sun Gold Rays with
my
Rosette.
mistake. So.
No. That was actually, it's interesting because I have a plaque at home on the wall, and I'm very proud of it. It's one of the few things that I actually put on the wall, and I look at it once in a while because in Japanese it's a little bit vague as to whether the emperor gave it to me or whether it was just issued in the Imperial Palace. And in reality, I was granted the award in the consulate in San Francisco, but the plaque that I was given says that the emperor has applied the seal on this wonderful piece of, fancily printed paper. So I didn't meet the emperor then, even though it was technically issued by him. But when I won the Japan Foundation Award just the other year, as part of that award, you have an audience with either the emperor or the crown prince. And in my case, I guess because the emperor was busy and he was about to retire anyway, I met with the crown prince, who is now the emperor. And it was a lovely meeting. They were both lovely.
They come across that way.
Oh, they're very sweet.
Yes.
Both the crown prince or the emperor and the empress they're very sweet people.
Very
sweet.
We thought, like James brought it up, they are very different, very well, more Western educated because of their.
That's right.
They were educated in England, so there's on the topic of parallels with England, right?
Yeah, and so they're very knowledgeable and they're very sweet. And I met them with actually the other award winners. There were two other award winners that year of the Japan Foundation Award. And we had this audience, and I had an opportunity to, actually ask them a question or have a little dialogue with them. And they were asking me what I do and so forth and so on. And I said I'm a big fan of Tetsuo Atom or Astroboy. And I said that I had worked on translated the entire manga series, 23 volumes. And I knew that the emperor today was a big fan of Tetsuo Atom or Astroboy when he was a boy, because I have a fabulous photo of him with his mom, until recently the Empress, and he's looking up at an Astroboy doll in 1964, I think.
So he would have been a teenager, I think.
He's a young boy.
He was a boy. He was a boy.
Oh wait, he was born in the 60s.
Yeah, he was a boy.
Yeah, that's right. So he was just.
So in this photo, he's looking at this, what today would be a very clunkily designed Astroboy figurine or a Mighty Atom doll, but you can see he's in awe of this.
I'm not sure if it's because of the black and white, but it looked like such a striking image when you showed it in your panel today and stuff like that. And it was too bad you couldn't find a way to use it, as you said, because there was no way they were going to let you use it. But it was such a striking image. Image tells 1,000 words, and that was one of those images. It just told 1,000 words.
But when I was talking with the now emperor, I said, to me, the original manga were so fascinating to go back and read them as an adult, even though they're written for 10-year-old boys. And I said, I just found the stories so fascinating to see because Tezuka was writing about our era in his time, which was 1951, 52, 53, whatever. And the now emperor, I remember distinctly, he said, yes, he says, I used to like Astroboy. I should go back and read the manga. That really stuck in my mind.
Well, I mean, it was a timely piece because obviously it came in the aftermath of the war and the bomb and the A bombs, and it kind of delved a little bit into that type of stuff.
Yeah, although I think the real reasons for its popularity had not so much to do with that, but for the yearning for modern science and a modern world and technology.
And how they were progressing forward and stuff like that.
Going
and
forward,
what can happen
not looking
with
back.
that, because that was the environmentalist bent that you're paving over your past and stuff like that. But some incredible things to put in for a younger audience. And there are other works that have done it afterwards and stuff like that, but it's so few and far between, I find, when you have that. Especially when you go back, as you said, and you read it with an adult mind, you're like, oh my goodness.
It's amazing.
And you will just stick on a page, right? You're not just flipping through. You're actually engaging in it.
Well, most people in North America, at least, they know of Astroboy or Mighty Atom through the animation. And, of course, the animation is so watered down because all animation is created by a large organization, and there are budget constraints, and there are all kinds of broadcast restrictions and so forth and so on. But if you go back and you read the original stories, it's just shocking to think that Tezuka was writing these themes about AI and man-machine interface and racial discrimination and even suicide bombers and drug addiction in the 1950s, and he's writing for 10-year-old boys. I mean, it wouldn't even be possible today. So those stories have just incredible depth if you read them as an adult, and actually for children today they're hard to read because the early ones are quite dense.
Is it because of partly because of the language, like the way?
Not so much the language. It's mainly because the pace of reading manga has changed so much. Now people are used to being able to skim through many pages and go through a whole book, tankobon, at incredible speed. And in those days, there were a lot more words. Pages were more expensive to produce, so the pages are much more dense in terms of information.
And that's an interesting concept to me.
Yeah.
Now let's go talk Tezuka. I guess that was the first panel. That was the panel you did earlier today. You met him? What was your interactions like with him?
Well, I knew him from 1977 until he died in 1989, and I knew him quite well. I never went to stay at his house or anything like that, but I had quite a close relationship with him in the sense that, he would call me up and send a fax sometimes, and this is before email, but he would say, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And he would, I still have a collection of like New Year's cards he would send, and he'd like to tease me, so it was more than just a working relationship. He would always say, why aren't you married yet? That kind of
and we met your wife.
So right.
You did good.
Right.
I think he'd be
really
impressed.
That was after he passed away. He would have been relieved. But I worked as his interpreter many times when he would come to America, and also I interpreted for him in Canada as well. We came to film festivals in Canada. And I went to Disney World with him, and I went all the way around America with him. I went to the UN with him, and I was very fortunate to be able to spend a lot of kind of quality time with him, because when we're in an airplane, I'd be sitting next to him, and I'd have like 4 or 5 hours
sleep
just to talk.
The other way around.
And I was always fascinated by him. He was older than I am, of course, so for me he was like, in Japanese they say kumo no ue no sonzai. He was like somebody above the clouds. He was,
that revered.
Yeah, hugely famous and so forth and so on. I was just young, I didn't know anything.
It caught my attention when you showed me that picture about significant people in the Japanese saw significant in the 20th century.
Yeah.
So, and then you were really taken aback by seeing Tezuka.
Yeah, he was hugely famous when I met him, and I was just, I was still in my 20s, and I was just honored that one thing that was odd was he was always interested in what I thought, and I realized in retrospect it was partly because I speak Japanese, and he probably didn't have much contact with people who could speak his language who were not Japanese. So I was a vehicle.
Part of the whole translation process, actually.
Yeah. So I worked as his interpreter, but he also wanted a lot of information from me, and I think that I was useful to him in that way. So we would get involved in long conversations, and I've actually written about it. But once on my way to Canada, to a film festival, I was supposed to meet him in the San Francisco airport, and he was coming from Japan, and I was sitting at the airport after he arrived. We were supposed to change plane. We were supposed to get on the plane to go to Canada from SFO, and we're sitting in the lobby in front of the boarding area. We're in the boarding area, but in front of the counter. And I became so involved in the conversation with Tezuka that I didn't realize that the plane to Canada had come and landed in San Francisco, and everybody had boarded and they'd already taken off. So
you missed your flight.
I missed the plane.
Oh no!
Yeah, so I was in big trouble. But he was very sweet to me, and there was no problem. And he understood, because of course he'd been involved in talking with me. So he was, I guess, partly responsible for distracting me. But it was embarrassing. Let's put it that way, because I was also partly in charge of his schedule.
Oh well.
And I can't remember whether he had other people with him then. I'm sure he had one or two. There were always other people in his entourage, but we missed the plane entirely because I was just so involved in this discussion with him, and that happened a lot. and he would remember things that I had said, and later on, sometimes he would bring them up, and he would even write about them. He used to have columns in what was called Kinema Junpo, which is a movie magazine. It's hard to believe, but in addition to all of his work and all the things he did, he also wrote columns for a movie magazine. And in those columns, sometimes he would quote things that I had told him. I remember I told him about, like, Murphy's Law.
That would be an interesting translation for him. I'm just thinking about that because we have sayings and they don't really translate, right? So it's like...
But I often tried to tell him things about America and, American culture and things like that. And he remembered everything. He had a frighteningly good memory.
You missed the conversations. When you had those conversations, the way you describe these conversations, you must miss them.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's been, 1989, so 30 years now.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, I first met him in 1977, and I was with a small group called Dadakai. And I had an good American friend, Jared Cook, who also worked as Tezuka's interpreter. And then there were two Japanese, Shinji Sakamoto and Midori Ueda. And the four of us, we put together this group to translate manga into English and promote manga to the Western world. And that's how I met Tezuka, because Sakamoto somehow got some connection to Tezuka Productions, and we got an appointment. And we went there and we met the manager, and we were going to ask him if we could translate the Phoenix. And then Tezuka just materialized, and he started talking to us. And that's how I first met him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was 1977, a long time ago.
That's a
long time ago.
That's a great story, though.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
Well, before you were born, and I was barely around. So.
Well, I know later he told me that originally he thought I was a little scary. Cause,
really?
Well, I'm tall.
Oh, well, yes.
I'm tall, and I probably had I didn't have a ponytail, but my hair was a little long. Maybe I had a beard at the time, and I guess he thought that, whoa.
Almost like Norm, actually, maybe. Maybe a bit like Norm. So, but I wish we can go on and on, but wow, that sounds like quite the experience having been in his presence. So maybe the whole bit about him being like a significant figure in the 20th century, it's justified.
Yes,
it really does sound justified.
Oh yeah, he was I worked as an interpreter for most of my life, and I've met a lot of famous people. I've interpreted for many people, and I think I can say safely he was a true genius.
Mm-hmm.
A true genius.
And missed still to this day, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so let's move on, because as I said,
sure.
Let's change subjects because I did want to talk about touch on just a little bit on each of the subjects of your panels. The other one which is the one I saw in full yesterday, was you talked at length about the Four Immigrants Manga.
Yeah, I could talk about that forever.
Oh, I know. And that was a really informative thing. When we first met back in '98, that book was about to come out.
I was wondering whether I talked about it. I can't remember
I
talked about.
You did mention it at the time. I don't remember you talking about it.
I probably didn't give a whole presentation on it.
No, but now you have, and it sounds like you've had longer time to reflect on this, because there's quite the story behind this.
Well,
that research.
I'm still very involved with it. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, Kiyama, Henry. I forgot his Japanese name.
Henry Kiyama,
Yoshitaka Kiyama.
Yeah.
He was. Well, I wish we can't go too much into details. This is fairly autobiographical.
Yeah, I can go into a little detail, and
we have time.
Your microphone won't melt. But he came to San Francisco in 1904, and he lived in San Francisco off and on for many years until he went back to Japan when relations between the U.S. and Japan got so bad it was hard for him to stay before World War II. And he came to California to study fine art. He was one of the early Japanese artists who wanted to learn Western perspective and coloring and oil painting and that sort of thing. And he was very talented in fine art, in oil and also sketching. And he attended a college in San Francisco, but he also worked as what were then called schoolboys. That was the term for Japanese who were used as houseboys and servants and whatnot. And he was part of a class called shosei in Japanese, which really means the sort of intellectual students, really. And he focused on learning Western art and fine art, and he became a very good artist. But at some point in 1927, he decided to create a comic strip. And he exhibited the work for the comic strip in San Francisco, and it was originally all in color, and I think he was hoping to get it serialized in a newspaper, but he couldn't. It was a bilingual work. You had to be able to read and understand Japanese and English in order to fully understand it. There was no translation provided for either. So his market, he was a terrible businessman. His market was probably just limited really to the people in his immediate circle of friends and his immediate environment. But in creating this work that he exhibited in 1927, which was over 114 pages, he really created the first documentary comic strip, autobiographical comic strip. And when he later had that printed in 1931 and published as a book, you can say, arguably, depending how you define a comic book, that an immigrant from Japan created the first comic book or first graphic novel in the United States or in North America. So that was my entry point for this story.
And then, in many ways, obviously, it was a touch point for manga in Japan too. So
well, not so much in Japan, because his influence in Japan was basically zero. He went back to Japan, and I think because of the war, it would be very difficult for somebody who had lived as long as he had in the United States to be accepted naturally. So he went back to his little tiny hometown and became an art instructor at the local school, high school. So he was cut off from Tokyo. If he'd been able to integrate into the Tokyo artist society, he might have had a much bigger impact. But very few people in Japan until recently had ever heard of him.
Yeah, the book was Four Immigrants was recently translated for a Japanese audience, but it sounds like correct me the status in terms of the Four Immigrants manga in Japan.
When Henry went back to Japan in the late 20s, actually, when he went back and forth several times. But when he went back to have his work printed, he wasn't thinking of getting it published in Japan or a readership in Japan at all. So it was just targeting the United States. And then when he went back to Japan permanently, his work was never published in Japan. And it was only available really or only known about by a limited number of people in Japan who are like historians or historians of manga history. Very few people had ever heard of it. And there is no translate. Well, the family has issued reproductions of the original. And there was, about 10 years ago, there was a annotated version of the original with notes, with some of my original notes from the English version. So it gets complicated because it was a bilingual manga.
Yes.
So there is no pure modern Japanese version for young Japanese people to read. So for young Japanese people, it's very hard to read now.
Okay. And you mentioned the language.
The language has changed.
Much.
Yeah, the language has
for
changed.
a lot of people now.
Yeah, it'd be hard to read.
It was
Meiji era. Yeah.
So, and in the process, you befriended the Kiyama family.
I have nearly been adopted by the family. I'm very close to them.
Yes.
They're dear friends of mine, and I know 3-4 generations of them now, and they all actually except for the great grandson, the daughter of Henry and his granddaughter and their spouses and whatnot, they all live not in the same house but on the same land that Henry was born in and died in. If you can imagine.
And he was long gone. He was passed away in 1950.
Yeah, in the 50s. Yeah.
I didn't want to bring up the musical because it was adapted. You brought up it was adapted into musical.
Yes.
When in the panel yesterday, you tried to play at least the
audio didn't work.
No, audio didn't work. It is on YouTube.
Yes,
so I will put a link for our listeners.
Yeah, please.
And I heard a little bit. It had a very vaudeville vibe to it.
But that's the vibe of the comic, because when Henry created it and published it formally in 1931, that was the vibe.
And there was an interview with I forgot his name now.
Min Kang?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was an interview with a local CBS station in San Francisco.
Yeah, it's a fabulous musical, and hopefully they'll be able to produce it in other cities, because it's just it was so moving, and it was sold out every night as far as I know, and people were just so moved by it. It
would be of interest in many ends. I mean, here in Toronto, we do have a very noteworthy theater community here, and on that topic, and this is a bit of an aside, Asian Canadian, Asian American actors would be pining for a job like that should it ever become available.
No, it's a dream job for Asian American or Asian Canadian actors, and that was one of the things that was also so moving about the musical, is that all the actors were Asian Americans, and you could just tell that they just put their heart into it.
Yes.
And they also could relate to the story.
That's a key part of it, I think.
The story actually resonates so strongly today, especially in the United States, because there's all these issues over immigration. And many of the themes that are built into the story are themes that people are still struggling with today.
Which is a little sad.
It is sad, yeah.
Which I find kind of sad, actually.
Yeah.
But
it is sad. But of course, there's a lot of things in the world that are sad. Right?
Yes, there is. So I want to bring that up because I mean, maybe we can, I would have been curious to see this now that I know it existed. And obviously there isn't a production running right at the moment, I'm thinking, but it's a big thing because to have, once again, Asian Canadians fresh off the boat in the States, the sitcom there. Up here in Canada, we have Kim's Convenience, which is if you have Netflix, you'll be able to see that.
Fresh off the boat, who was that by?
Constance Wu is one of the big stars of it. So she starred in Crazy Rich Asians. She's not she's one of the co-stars. I wish I could remember other names in that show off the top of my head, but that's been a touch point. As I said, here in Canada, we have Kim's Convenience, which tells the story of a Korean family in Toronto. And that's based off of a play, which I'm told has garnered some attention from Korean American actors down in the States.
Well, both Kiyama's comic book and then also the musical by Min Kang would, I'm sure, resonate deeply with people in all the major cities in Canada as well. Yeah. And I hope that someday people will have a chance to see it, because it's deeply moving.
Well, it was funny because my father, obviously they immigrated from the Philippines, but only in recent years, he actually told me about stories of of my grandfather. And he told me some very odd stories about, he briefly studied in the U.S., specifically in Chicago, and he was one of those type of errand boys. But apparently, and maybe this is my grandfather's tall tales, he worked under Al Capone.
Ah, wow. That's
he
a
worked
story.
under Al Capone for
story.
errands, and the problem is his journals are long lost. They were lost in a storm back in the Philippines, so we have nothing else to really refer to. But my dad a few years ago told me he would tell him that my grandfather would tell him those stories when he was a child.
Oh, it's too bad you didn't write them down or record them.
I will probably, now that I brought it up in this conversation, I'll probably ask my dad to see what he remember, a little bit more about what he remembers. I mean, I don't know what the story would have been for such servants during that period in Prohibition Chicago.
Yeah,
but
that's one of the that's one of the fascinating things about the Four Immigrants Manga as it's constituted, because there are so few first-person works, documentary works by immigrants, because mostly first-generation immigrants don't have time to leave records and write stories and create comic books and write novels and that kind of thing, because everybody's trying to make a living. So actually, that's one reason that the Four Immigrants Manga makes it such a rare work.
Yeah, I have to dig
so
my
if
copy
you can
up.
find your
Well,
grandfather's journal somewhere.
it would be back in the Philippines.
Yeah,
but
if you could find it, that would be fascinating.
If we ever see that. I mean, I'll have to ask my father what details he remembers.
I mean, it's amazing your grandfather was able to actually keep a journal. That's
So, and then he went back to the Philippines, and then married, had his family, and 6 kids, including my father, who was number 3 in the family. And the rest goes on and on. But so I understand that feeling, because I see it through my father's stories. But that was a fascinating thought in and of itself. And as I said, well, I'll put up a link to at least the YouTube videos of the promotional material for it. You know what? There's somebody we talked. We remember years ago we saw a theater production. Michael Rubinoff. We talked at the theater production. Michael, there's a gentleman it was put on by a man named Michael Rubinoff, and he was the co-creator and producer of Come From Away, which was a major musical here, which is a very popular musical here in Canada. So I'm wondering,
is very popular now on Broadway, of course.
Yes,
and that's the tale of Gander, Newfoundland during 9/11. Yes.
So.
Oh wow, that would be interesting.
And I've talked to him a few times, and maybe I should try and get in touch with him just to touch base with him. Yeah. That would be an interesting thought, anyway. Yeah. Oh wow! But I didn't. The musical, as I said, was a recent development from my standpoint. But hearing you talk about it all these years later, that really, that just caught my attention.
Well, it was amazing to me that Min Kang, who's the writer and also the composer of the musical, that he found a copy of the translation I'd done.
Oh, a secondhand store.
Yeah,
secondhand bookstore.
Store. So you just never know how these things work out. And he's a fabulous. Not only composer, but story creator, and his future is bright.
It looked really interesting. So
his future is bright.
It sounds like, as I said, music that would have been reflective of the time. So I would love to see that. I hope it, and I hope there's another chance somewhere along the line, and it gets further east.
Yeah,
gets a little further east for us. Yeah. We would love to see it. Okay, so one last topic. Tomorrow you said you would be doing a panel, and I know that there's a bit of ambiguity in both the guides, the electronic and the paper guides. You'll be talking about the manga industry and manga translation today.
I'll be talking about.
Give me your overview, and then I have a thought, and I want to just touch something with you.
It's a personal perspective of manga translation, so it'll be based on my own observations and experience with manga translation. Originally it was mistakenly billed as a talk about Astroboy, but I kind of covered Astroboy today in my talk about
James,
Tezuka.
I'm sure.
A lot of Osamu Tezuka was Astroboy, but that and Blackjack and Leo Emperor, all those ones are his big ones.
So that's covered. So tomorrow I'll be talking about my own perspective on manga translation, some of my own experiences, and some of the issues that I've seen, and give some thoughts on it.
Okay. And I guess we'll hype that up. I guess that means we should try and put this up tonight. I'll try and get this up so people can listen to it.
I just ruined your evening. Yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm trying to debate. Like how much. It'll probably be worth sitting in and listening to.
Well, if you're free.
Yes, I will do my best. I will. That is.
Well, there's a lot
personal.
to do in the
Well, that's Anime North.
Yeah, Anime North. There's a lot to do. This is a fun convention.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that.
There's an incredible breadth, as we say.
Right.
Right? Before we finish up, we are looking out.
Right.
We'll talk about this in a second. Where we're sitting here in the
people dressed
in the
as samurai, half-naked ladies coming by. Yeah.
Well, okay. So let me touch this thought, and then we'll talk about what we're looking at out here. Well, the follow-up to your during the follow-up at your at Anime North 21 years ago, the next night you did lecture at the Japan Foundation in Toronto, talking about the manga industry, well, the manga culture in Japan. One of the striking pictures that, and much of my memory is blurry, admittedly too.
Well, you remember better than I do.
I remember you showing this picture of a newsstand at a train station.
You have a fabulous
stacked
memory.
full of what would have been shown in Jumps. Wow. And then you told me by the time, when the next hour, all these books will probably be gone. Good likelihood that many of them will be read and probably disposed of.
Mike, you just have a fabulous memory. I think
it's selective.
You have that, and then you have the striking thing of what he said in his last panel about how that just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
But your memory is exactly what I probably said.
The thing
to
is
the word.
That was only
to the word.
The problem is,
I
admit a lot of other parts of that lecture are blurry to me. So.
No, but you remember that photo. I mean, I have a vivid memory of the photo. I know exactly what I say when I introduce that photo because I showed it many, many times over the years in talks.
It's still the one that sticks out with me.
You have an incredible memory. My hat is off.
It is. It is at best selective. I will tell you that. In my right hand, I'm holding a Kindle with a translated copy of Kimigori Orange Road on it.
Oh yeah.
And I talk a little bit about e-readers and stuff. In the past, because I have a fascination with these type of things, and I've read more than a few books with it. Maybe I should just keep this turned on while I show this picture of Ayokowa. Toronto's home to Kobo. Toronto is where Kobo was founded. Rakuten's e-reader service and device. It was founded here actually.
Wow.
And before
Chapters
Rakuten bought
Indigo.
it. Yeah, Chapters Indigo, the bookstore, and then
really?
it's still based. It still has its head offices in Toronto in Liberty Village.
So
in the
Kobo
West
was founded here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chapters
founded
Indigo because
Really?
they were like borders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so that's how it got started because
Wow.
they did their
So
own e-reader.
this is the
and then
founding
they
city.
spun it off.
Wow.
and then ultimately, I forgot exactly how long ago it was bought by Rakuten.
Do you have a Kobo?
I don't have a Kobo. I'm more of a Kindle
Because
person.
the advantage of the Kobo is
I know.
that you can, at least from the United States, you can more easily buy the
That's the
manga
thing,
from
and
Japan. You can't buy on the Kindle.
This
right?
This is one of those sad parts about being locked into ecosystems because at the time I made my first choice of an e-reader. I chose the Kindle because I thought the technology was a little better. Their readers were a lot more advanced at that point, but the gap has certainly quite narrowed. And I bought another e-reader. I bought this one secondhand a couple weeks ago from a nice lady who had no use for it, and so I took it. And it's strange because I know the culture, or at least the technology inside. This is like a first generation Paperwhite, and for consumption in the United States, this only holds 2 gigs. This is a 2 gig one. I know that they've gotten larger, but strangely in Japan, they got to larger sizes a little sooner. So 8, 16, 32, those are more common. Those you get that a lot more readily in Japan. And e-readers, whether it be Kindles or Kobos, you always have weird special editions of them that probably are only specific to there. And it's probably because of all the images, because they're so data heavy. They take up so much space.
More than
they need the
text.
space. They need the space for to have that.
But it's just a tragedy that there are these vertical islands, siloed islands of information, and they don't.
Yeah, that's the part I'm wondering now. Like, what's your take on the digital version? Because James mentioned to me the digital consumption is iffy at best.
And I was talking to Fred about that before. I guess we talked about before in the fact that you don't actually own anything now. You're just renting and stuff like that. And that's the
Yeah.
thing of I like owning the book, and it's something I feel. You know what I mean?
I
can go
kind
through.
I've started to kind of go a little bit that way too. Strangely, this is a hold off for me. I got these copies as part of a Kickstarter campaign when I forgot when. Who's the author of Orange Road? I keep forgetting off the top of my head. It's Matsumoto too.
Matsumoto, but I forget his first
Name. Yes, because they made that available through digital manga. I bought, and I have a physical copy as well, but that's sitting with some relatives right now. So I'll get that from them soon at some point. But I was able to get these, and fascinating, but something tells me it would be more interesting to still hold paper. And I know there's studies now that say you
retain more.
You retain more. You absorb better. You absorb information better through paper.
Yeah, I think one issue in Japan. Well, there's a couple of issues, but one big issue, of course, is space, because people don't have big living area.
And the mobile environment is easier
The
for certain
mobile
things.
There was
environment
in
is
video
easier.
games.
It's partly. I mean, we talked Marie Kondo, strangely,
Yeah.
one time, James and I. But I think it's also the history also says a little bit to me, because I saw a documentary about one of the great fires in Japan during the Edo period, and how it spawned a culture of just being able to pick up and go from your residence during an emergency. And in many respects, some of that mentality remains.
Well, one of the issues with paper manga, of course, in Japan is that stories now they've been expanded to the point where, they're 20, 50, or 100 volumes, tankobon, and people don't have room for them. Especially if you're a student in university or something like that, you have a tiny space, and people in America have this fantasy image of Japanese living spaces as being these sort of aesthetically beautiful.
They don't get as much. Trust me,
they have no idea what it's really like.
It's small.
It's small and
small
cluttered.
Is being generous. I think small is generous.
A 500 square foot apartment, which is considered small here, would probably be considered larger there.
Big, and of course the amount of clutter in Japanese small apartments is enormous. So when you're trying to save multiple series, and each series is like 50 volumes in tankobon, it's just not possible. So that's a big driver, I think, behind sales of digital manga, actually.
For better or worse?
Depends what your preference is. If you need more space in your apartment, then digital is better. But if you're a purist and you like paper manga, you like the tactile feel of the paper manga, and also if you like the way that manga are laid out in paper, in magazines where you have like double page spreads and the whole manga is designed to create tension as you move forward with use of more space and less space and for dramatic imagery. That's all really difficult in digital manga when people are reading them, for example, increasingly on their phones, where you're reading
reading this is
panel
a weird...
based. If you're reading it like on a panel basis, it changes the experience completely.
Yeah, this is kind of odd for me. I mean, I've read novels on...
But this is actually... some people would try and read entire manga pages on that without enlarging them. And it's much more difficult on a phone, obviously, because your Kindle is pretty big compared to a phone.
Yeah.
Compared to most people's phones.
So it's an okay size, but I thought it caught my attention, and I thought I should, bring that up. Because I know that publishers have sometimes given up on finishing a series in a physical form, but sometimes they'll release the final volume strictly in digital.
Yeah,
or
that's a bit off-putting.
That's how longer series now are getting done, is through digital, like Kodansha for Kodansha Advance in San Francisco. That's what they're doing for longer series. Like, for example, Space Brothers. It's a brilliant series, Space Brothers, but it's over 20 volumes, so they've been going digital.
And if you, realistically speaking, if you think about issues of artistic merit and so forth, and convention aside, if you think about the economics of creating manga, paper manga, and not only how difficult it is and expensive it is to get all that paper together, but to bind it and to have trucks to haul it around, go through distributors. You have to store it. In Japan, you have to go through these giant distribution companies, and it has to be trucked again out to train station kiosks, and then people lug it home, and then when they finish reading the magazines in Japan, they stack them up usually, and then they would have chirigami kokan, or paper exchange trucks, come around, and you'd give them your old manga magazines, and they'd give you like free toilet paper, that kind of thing. And so if you think about that process, it's incredibly inefficient. So it's understandable that things would.
It just makes
shift.
me
They
think
would-
when
they
you
would-
say that
they
about
would start
the
shifting.
bygone era.
Once
that,
again, it is a for better or worse scenario.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of interesting drawbacks. Right.
No, I was thinking
Yeah,
about
technically-
bygone eras, and you say that, and it goes back to the train again, how you used to hear, and I'm not sure how truthful it was, about them leaving a manga, big one, on the chair and someone else picking it up and reading it. You know what I mean? On their commute. I'm not sure how true that was.
No,
you know
it's
what I
true.
mean?
In the subways in Japan,
And I'm not sure if that
5
happens
o'clock,
anymore. You know what I mean?
Not anymore. You don't.
But you know what I mean? It's
You don't
like
see
crazy
people. You don't see people reading manga on trains anymore. That's
because
over.
they have all their devices. So.
Either that, or they're just not reading them anymore. And actually, sales of manga magazines have plummeted in Japan. It's a big issue.
It's a thing here too.
It's a big issue.
But they've definitely
there's
been
news on that.
behind on the digital curve and stuff like that, because they've been very paper oriented and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So it takes time, but it's interesting to see how they'll go forward, because rights
Yeah.
is the biggest issue for, I know, a lot of them.
For digital manga.
Yeah. Well, paper. Now that you brought up paper, I know Japan loves the tactile
Yeah,
feel.
yeah, and I would hate
Japanese
to
too.
see paper manga disappear, but you can make the argument, as I often have in talks, is that it's entirely possible that the paper manga format that we love is very much a 20th century phenomenon, and it's sort of like ukiyo-e or woodblock.
And Helen
prints,
McCarthy
and then-
talked a lot about buskers telling stories just with beside images and stuff. So who knows?
Who knows what's going to happen? And you also don't know, because 10 years from now, people may be so tired of the ephemeral nature of digital content that they all want, in addition to vinyl albums, they want paper manga. Things may change. Who knows?
I guess that's why. I guess
There
that's why
goes
when
the
I.
pendulum, because
right.
now we have record stores coming back, and
That's
who
right.
would have thought that?
That's
and
right.
there are some people that want to listen to cassettes. Can you
Yeah.
believe that? Cassettes,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
audio
Yeah.
quality on a
Yeah.
cassette
I guess
is
that's-
just not.
No one knows.
I guess
No one
that's
knows.
why I chose both a book and a digital version of the same thing.
Yeah, no one knows.
Anyway, oh wow. Well, it's been great talking. We did want to you do want to acknowledge this, because this is your first visit here in 21 years. We are sitting inside the Anime North office, which overlooks Dixon Street, right across, and we got a view of the Toronto Congress Centre right across the street. So if you're a regular here at Anime North, if you're coming between the two buildings and coming from the Congress Centre into the Delta Hotel here, chances are you're coming down this narrow corridor that sits just passing a car rental place just right at the door over there, but you're also passing the Anime North's year-round office, and we're sitting inside one of the offices watching people
everybody.
pass by.
Hi, everybody.
We're sitting around
Everybody.
I know you remarked as to how things have changed over 21 years from Michener to here, to the West End here, near the airport.
Actually, my wife was asking me, she said, how many people were at the convention in 1998? And I don't know the exact figure, but I doubt if there were more than 2,000.
I would have said, and this is just completely uneducated, I would have been so shocked if it got over to four figures myself.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah, yeah. And here we are. I think it's scaled up probably 1,000 times. It's just
What's the number?
incredible.
What's the number that you were aware of last time?
It was around 34,000, but it probably includes staff and all that, so they might hit over 35,000, stuff like that. But it's a crazy amount of people.
Yeah.
But even thinking back to when you said 21 years ago, if it hit four figures, I'd still be incredibly impressed given the era.
Given the era and the fact that was Anime North's second go round, and as I said, the 20 years have had its waves as well for Anime North. I've watched from afar on it and observed it to some degree. As you can see, it's a very across the board show. Lots of stuff to do. It's practically like it is
It's
that
amazing.
type of
It's
festival.
more than just anime and manga.
Yeah,
As
it's
we
amazing.
said, we have the programming for Japanese culture, video games. Like they touch every touch point you
Yeah.
feel sometimes.
And also the workshops. I mean, the diversity of the workshops offered, I just find it astounding. And in a way, it's transcended, of course, Japan completely. It's all Asia, and eventually it'll be everything. You know, it's just amazing to me.
Yeah, it's just sort of how like it's become a little bit more Asian, a lot more like gotten to that. But clearly the influences is there. I mean, maybe how fandom deals with that with the culture, because now you're translating the fandoms that may have started in Japan, but it's taken on different lives elsewhere, and sometimes with different types of things.
And it's very different than the fandom in Japan. And also, of course, most people forget that most of the fan community in Japan and the conventions and the cosplay and everything, they forget that a lot of that actually comes from North America to begin with.
So basically, there's something going both ways.
It's a world of mirrors.
I remember, what was it, the first World, was it a World Fair? I saw World that one image, and it was of that sci-fi, you know what I mean? And it's in my mind, but I remember that being the first time.
Well,
it's quite a strange image.
A lot of the impetus for cosplay and the big conventions in Japan came from what Japanese artists saw when they came to North America, and they visited like science fiction conventions, and then also Comic-Con in San Diego.
Yeah, that must have been it. It was the first sci-fi convention, I believe, and it was like, what was it, the 20s? Or it must have been 20s, I want to say.
Well, even much later, even in 79, 1980, I can remember going to San Diego Comic Convention with Tezuka and other people like Monkey Punch and whatnot.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, that just hits home because that.
But they, they commented on. They said we got to have more stuff like this in Japan. So that's what happened.
Well, we were as we were doing the panels. I forgot his name, but we saw those other two panels about talking about fandom and how Japan and the rest of the world can learn from each other on that.
And also it's this constant mirroring of cultures. That's one of the things that's so fascinating to me. In fact, I wrote a whole book about it, about North America and the four Japans. There's this kind of reflecting back and forth.
One of the books I don't have. I have to. I will. I'm going to the bookstore.
Oh no, that's out of
or
print.
The library.
It's out of print. Don't worry.
Go to the library.
I'll give you a copy.
We'll talk another time. So the other thing you taught me after that, during the after the Japan Foundation talk, we had a little reception, had some I think some sushi and other stuff. And then as we were leaving that evening, I told this story to the others on the show. You showed us you did a tajime for us, basically a rhythmic clap for us. So. You and the staff did that as we left that night.
Wow.
So I taught a rhythmic clap with the others, and that's our tradition. Before every recording.
Oh, really?
Later tonight we'll do that. We always do that.
Wow.
So,
I don't even remember that. How about that?
Yeah, my own memory. There's my memory getting the best of me again, I guess. But it was. I just remember it. That's what
I don't remember doing that, but that's great. It's amazing. I remember eating Chinese food in Chinatown in Toronto with you guys, and then you're remembering the clapping thing.
I do have one.
It's like we're piecing the whole
as I said,
all those days together, aren't we?
We are telling a story.
We can reconstruct memories by just sort of merging what we remember.
That's why I want to. Maybe I'll have to talk to my dad and my older uncle a little bit more about my father, about my grandfather.
That's right. And then of course, what people don't remember, it's okay. You just make it up.
Maybe partly I did.
Yeah.
Before we go, I do have one thing to give you. Underneath, I do want to show this to you. Since we were talking a little bit of history. In a past episode, and I know you take some interest in history. In a past episode, we brought up the story of the Vancouver Asahi baseball team, which was a popular, was a championship amateur team, I think, in Vancouver in the pre-war, and got disbanded, obviously, at the war because everybody got taken into internment camps. About a couple of years ago, they were inducted into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame.
Wow.
A major motion picture has been made about them, and we talked at length about the dilemma of making a Japanese movie based on a very Canadian story. And earlier about a month or so ago, Canada Post announced that they'd issue a stamp to commemorate the group. One of my friends is a historian on Japanese internment camps in Canada, and she really hyped up having this, and she was nice enough to give this to me because she knew I wanted to give it to you.
Oh wow!
So this is the booklet and a stamp.
Oh, thank you.
A stamp from it, a stamp based on it. I know you take some interest in history, so
I do. Yeah, thank you.
this is a distinct part of Canadian history and the angle, the Japanese internment camp angle here in Canada.
Thank you.
My understanding is only one member of the Vancouver Asahi is still alive. His name is Kai Kamenishi.
Wow.
And I don't know where he lives. I think he lives in Toronto these days.
Well, you should interview him.
Oh, I don't know if I'm the one who should be. That's funny enough, though. I know that maybe we can get a connection because my friend has met my friend has met him.
Well, I think you should try and interview him. That would be valuable.
Well, I mean, we can talk about maybe what he thought of the movie, but we talk about it in that angle.
Yeah.
But I thought you'd take some interest in knowing the story and learning the story.
No, it's great. Thank you.
And maybe you can search out the movie itself.
Yeah.
There's a documentary on the National Film Board website here in Canada, that 1-hour documentary, and then of course the movie, which came out in 2017. I think it had its Canadian premiere in Vancouver, I believe. Its Canadian premiere in Vancouver. It was screened here in Toronto at the time as well, and I know it played to a sold out house.
Great. Wow.
So that's for you, and
you.
I hope you maybe learn that story, learn another fascinating story.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
That's from myself and everybody here.
Great.
From myself and everybody here for taking the time. And I'm sorry if we kept too much time.
No. It's been great. So thank you very much for interviewing me.
Well, it is such a pleasure.
Yeah.
It is such a pleasure, and I hope we get to talk at least on email again.
Yeah, and hopefully it won't be
20 years?
20 years for that.
We'll talk again. We'll talk again.
Okay,
Fred Schodt, everybody.
Thank you.
Once again, a real pleasure. And
thank you.
well, that's it for us.